All right, today we're going to talk about what to do if your blocks are not the right size. And, when quilting, it would be nice if, I'm just going to adjust the camera here a little, if things just always worked the way that they're supposed to, but they don't. And so one really good skill in quilting is just learning how to make adjustments as needed when things don't go like they're supposed to go. So if you have finished your blocks and they are big blocks and they're not 25 inches, or if you've done the fat quarter friendly and they're not 12.5 inches, I'm going to walk you through how to make adjustments so that your quilt will still work. And here, the two things that are going to be the most important thing at this point are that your quilt blocks are the same size and square. And the second most important thing is we're going to try to preserve the proportions in the block to keep them the most similar amongst all of your blocks. So I've already cut my blocks into quarters. These were my big blocks that I cut down. And I, if you haven't seen that video, it's on my blog. And I will probably add it to Instagram too, I'm guessing. So one advantage to making your blocks that way is that if you make a big block and then you cut it into quarters, all of your edges are going to be perfectly straight because you cut them with your rotary cutter. And, if you are a decently accurate piecer, then your edges should be really close to straight on your fat quarter friendly blocks too. Notice they're not quite as straight, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the pattern that way. But this still works, so don't stress. So the nice thing is that if you have done the big blocks and then cut them into quarters, you now just need to worry about, and your blocks are uneven, we're just going to trim this outer edge. But if you have made the blocks this way and you need to trim them down, we may have to trim all four sides, depending on your situation. I'm going to try to walk you through every scenario I can think of what would happen with your blocks. And hopefully I address all problems that everybody's having. But if not, ask me. We can do another video, we can do a live, whatever you guys need to help figure this out. So here is a block, and my blocks are square. But let's say I had a big block here and I wanted to cut it into quarters and my block wasn't 25 inches square. I would just use the measurement here and cut it into quarters. It's in the other video. Watch the other video about cutting your blocks. So let's say I did that. I have 4 blocks that were cut into quarters, and now let's say these seams, like this seam doesn't go all the way to the edge, or things are kind of wavy or wonky or something somehow. How do you deal with that? So find your smallest block. Let's say my smallest block was 12 inches square now. So now I'm going to cut every block to 12 inches square. And if you used this block as a guide, when you cut your block into quarters, then all of these in your blocks should be the same-ish size. So we're going to worry about just this outer one. So if I wanted to cut my block down to 12 inches squared, I have this big ruler that is 16.5 inches. I'm going to make sure my block is sitting nice and flat. And I'm going to square up the edges. Okay, and then I would just trim on both of these sides. Go through and do that with all of your blocks until they are the same size. Okay, so that's if your block is, if some of your blocks are too small. No matter if they're too big, too small, just find the smallest one and trim them down to a common size. Okay, so let's say you made the fat quarter friendly version and you have all kinds of things not lining up on all kinds of edges. So start on this inside portion. Let's say this time our smallest block was 12¼ inches. And if you have some sort of weird measurement, like just slightly smaller than 12¼ inches, you can either try to you can put some tape on your ruler to mark where that is so that you mark the same on all of them, or you can just cut them all down just slightly smaller to get to a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch measurement or whatever. Okay, so I want to, let's say I need to square up all sides. So right here, I'm just gonna use these lines right here, and I'm going to pick a measurement that works with my block. So here I have it lined up with the 4-inch line, and trim the sides so that they're nice and straight, and there aren't any weird seam things. I'm not going to trim my block because I don't need to, but I would trim these two sides. Okay, so then I would flip it around with the new size, and I would say I'm going for 12¼ line up the 12¼ both sides, and then trim this side. So yeah, that should address most problems. So when it comes to your sashing, you're going to have a problem because you find a piece that's not long. Your sashing pieces are 12½ inches long. So what you're going to need to do is keep the 1½ inch width, but then cut these pieces to whatever your new block size is, 12¼ 12 inches, whatever it is. And that will, obviously your long sashing pieces are also going to be too long. Technically, when you are attaching long sashing pieces, you should always measure them to be exactly the same width as you need so that you don't have any stretching, but don't worry about that. Just cut them like they say in the pattern. We'll talk about how to pin so you don't have stretching. I have a little trick for you for keeping everything lined up. It will be fine. So for now, once you've cut your block into quarters, just trim your block down to a common size, and then adjust. If you've already cut your sashing strips, cut them down to that same size so that they will fit. Because if you try to, if this was too long for this block and I tried to make it fit, it would cause all kinds of wonkiness trying to stretch it onto there. So hopefully that helps.